we're featuring one of my favorite guests from the podcast. This is Lloyd Goldstein today on Contrabass Conversations. I've had so much fun seeing how some interviews that I've done in the past have blossomed into friendships, and I consider Lloyd Goldstein, today's guest, a true friend. He is such an inspiring musician, bassist, composer, and just somebody that you want to know his story. It's just a wonderful story. We get into Lloyd's journey. I will be brief here at the outset, but I send out an email when people sign up for my email list. And one of my first emails that I send out is my 5 favorite podcast episodes. And I am featuring this week, as we close out 2017, 2 of those 5 that I recommend every time someone signs up for my email list. Lloyd's interview is one of them. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. Let's dig into this conversation with Lloyd Goldstein. If you could let people know what your first musical instrument was, that'd be great.
It was the bass.
It was the bass.
It was the bass. I was in 3rd grade, living in Long Island, nice upper middle class community with plenty of funding for music and stuff. And at the end of 3rd grade, they brought in the string instruments from the orchestra, and I was immediately attracted to the bass. I'm really not sure why, probably just the size of it or something. So unfortunately, the rest of that story is the violin teacher gave everybody lessons from 4th until 6th grade, half-hour a week. But that was the only instruction I ever had. I ended up graduating a year early from high school at the age of 16. I wasn't 17 until I got to college, until I was already in college. And unfortunately, in all those years, never owned an instrument, never practiced a single day. I think I didn't even find out about vibrato until I was a junior in high school or something. So my skills were incredibly primitive. When I finally decided that I wanted to study bass years later, at the age of 20, I couldn't really even play a C major scale. It's very weird. I mean, all that exposure must have meant something, because I had this enormous revelation at the age of 20. I mean, like a burning bush experience, that I wanted to play the bass, to make a life, to try to make a life out of it.
What happened at 20?
I had dropped out of school. I'd been in the State University of New York at Albany for like a year and a half or something. Had the great opportunity to go to college, but just was incredibly immature and no real direction. And I dropped out, and I followed in the interim, my parents had moved to Florida, and I kind of followed them down here, and I had really no sense of center or direction, and they weren't too thrilled about that. I was on a raw food kick. I wanted to learn about raw food and living kind of in nature, and I went and stayed with this cooperative community in the center of Florida, near the right on the Swanee River. Was a big acreage, and these people didn't really want me there either. I just kind of showed up on their doorstep, had no money, just very naive, not sure where my life was going. And I was living in a tent and trying to live off this diet that left me very weak, actually. And one morning they showed up I think they just wanted to get some work out of me. So they woke me up, and no coffee or anything, and they said, "We want you to saw this wood." And they provided me a table saw right out in the woods there. I don't even know how that happened. I don't even know what electricity there was where I was, but whatever, they managed. And they handed me this wood, and I immediately shoved my finger into the table saw. Ugh. And it was my middle finger on my left hand. And there was I had some brown cotton gloves on, and I couldn't tell what the damage was at that point, but I literally had this burning bush moment. I had this internal voice say exactly these words: "You idiot, you'll never play the bass again." Wow. And I hadn't touched it since since even before I dropped out of school. By the way, I was a music student at the other school, actually nominally a composition major. But again, there was a really wonderful bass teacher there, David Cobb, and a guy named Michael Bizzio. I don't know if you've seen him online, but he's a really great bassist. I noticed he was practicing hours and hours a day, and I thought he was out of his mind. I didn't know why anyone would do that, lock themselves up in a room like that. And anyway, didn't take lessons, got thrown out of the orchestra for not showing up on time. And that was the last time I touched a bass until that happened. So it was a number of years later. My finger actually healed up fine. It was fantastic. But in that moment, I didn't know what the status was, and it was scary. And I called my dad, and he said the most profound thing that anyone's ever said to me, I think. He said, I don't care what you do, Lloyd, as long as you put one foot in front of the other and walk in a direction. He was very encouraging. I ended up going to the local, I went to play for Lucas Drew, but like I said, I couldn't play a C major scale or hold a French bow for that matter. And he was very kind and gentle and sent me to a local community college, Broward Community College. And I met my first real teacher, Mike Groninger. And he was a virtuoso bassist, and I never forgot that first year. He was kind of a wild guy, very spontaneous person, but that sound he made was extraordinary, and it's really stuck in me somewhere, and the desire just started to really burn, to really want to play this instrument. But I was not particularly overly talented, and things took a long time. I managed to learn 2 movements of a sonata, I think, that entire year and play them well. And then I got a little scholarship to another school, Florida International University, and I was there for a year with a teacher named Vincent Kantorsky, and he was a student of Lucas's. And in the interim, I auditioned for the University of Miami twice, and the second time I was offered a 3/4 scholarship. The truth of the matter is, though, I still couldn't play more than a sonata or 2. But I could play them, I guess, well, or they saw something in me. So Lucas was willing to teach me. And that is how it happened. I don't think Lucas thought I was going to get a job. He pushed me really hard to get an education, double major in education and performance, which I did all the requirements for. But at the last minute, I balked at doing the internship because I really had my heart set on an orchestra job. Mm-hmm. And I was practicing at least 5 hours a day, some longer, really neglected my other studies a lot, and just was kind of obsessed with practicing. And this little job opened in the Florida Orchestra. It was called the Florida Gulf Coast Symphony. And I think it paid $7,000 a year. Okay. Yeah. And I know there were 2 guys that could have blown me out of the water in Miami, and they didn't go. And by just grace of God, I got this job in the Florida Orchestra. And it grew. They went on strike that year and became a salaried orchestra, and the money got better. And I ended up staying there for 21 years. Wow. 10 years into that, I felt like I had hit kind of a wall. The orchestra had a lot of ups and downs financially. My playing wasn't what I dreamed, or somehow it just didn't feel like it was going where it needed to go. And I hadn't really been exposed to other people, and I even considered another career. And I was on the phone with George Vance, and I'd never met him. I called him up because I was teaching a few students, and I wanted to find out about his books. Mm-hmm. And he invited me to the workshop that he hosted in the Washington, D.C. area with Francois every year. Okay. And I just said, why? Why should I do that? And he said, well, this guy is 67 years old, and we don't know how much longer he's going to. Well. And I said, okay, man, I trust you. I'm there, So I went to my first bass workshop very late in life. And I was totally, absolutely, that was it. That was the dream. That was when I was in 6th grade, I think it was. I had this dream of this amazing instrument. It wasn't really a bass per se. It was some kind of hybrid bass, guitar, electric. I don't know what it was, but it was something out of a science fiction novel. And it had this incredible power to communicate and to touch people. And that's how I felt about Francois. I thought, unbelievable. So this just the ease with which he played, the beauty of sound, the gracefulness of his movements, everything. So I became obsessed with, he showed this one simple exercise, moving the bow down, up, down, and with these certain movements, a certain way of propelling the hand and the wrist and the arm. And I became obsessed with just this one thing. And Nicholas Walker was at that first workshop as a young man. I saw him and I followed everybody around all week, all the faculty, and made them show this to me over and over again. Some of them had it and some didn't. And I went home, and I worked all year, and my colleagues in the orchestra thought I was out of my mind. I was using this light bow and trying to stand up and play and not playing very well in the orchestra. And though I should say, as the years went by and I managed to really learn how to do this, they weren't so skeptical anymore. But it was a long process. I went back the next summer and I pestered Francois so much that he finally just said, stop. He said, I can't give you the kind of time you need, to do this. You'll have to come to Paris. Oh. So I started going to Paris once a year for the next 4 or 5 years, for 2 weeks each time during Thanksgiving break from the orchestra. And I would just borrow bass and practice all day and walk around Paris at night. And it was a long process, Jason. I would say it took a decade I was doing yoga at the time. And I think if it hadn't been for my daily yoga practice, I don't think I ever could have done it. It was this painstaking, just every day, just trying to learn something new. I knew that everything would flow from this one basic movement, that if I could do this one beautiful movement, these 3 bows, connect 3 bows flawlessly using his approach, I knew that everything would emanate from that. And it actually did. Everything I'm doing now that's successful, all the work I'm doing, the arranging, everything, it wouldn't be what it is without that one thing. And Francois calls it the son premier. And I am obsessed with the son premier. And when I teach my students, it's one thing that I absolutely won't give up on teaching them. And changed my life. Absolutely changed my life.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about how yoga tied into that. And maybe I'll back up for a second. When did you first get into yoga?
The yoga practice started at around the same time that I met Francois. My back had been bothering me, or maybe a little earlier. I couldn't tell you the exact year, but my back was bothering me, and I went to a chiropractor, and he adjusted it, and I said, so how long will I be coming back to you? And he said, for the rest of your life. And I said, basically in my mind, that's not happening. Yeah. So I just started doing yoga. And for me, it was 15 years of hour and a half a day. I mean, the practice became very powerful for me. Mm-hmm. And it was the start of almost every day for me. And it's only been in the last few years that I kind of let it go for a while, but I'm back into practicing now. There's more to us than we realize in our, everyday mind. Yeah. We're deeper than that. We know more than we think. We're able to access a better focus and a creative flow. It's basically yoga. I think the key is it's remembering what we already know on a regular basis. Remembering that we need to have an open heart to make beautiful music. Remembering that we have to come to each day with kind of a beginner's mind, willing to evolve, willing to be open to new things, new directions, new ideas. And we need to dump garbage. We accumulate a lot of garbage throughout our lives. I'm going to be 60 this year. And there's a heck of a lot of stuff that happens throughout your life that if you don't find a way to let go of it and dump it, it can really burden you as time goes on. So this, for me, besides the physical aspect of yoga, it's a way of remembering what I'm capable of, remembering what my priorities are, what my purpose is, and having a better access to my creative self. In the first 2 years of the yoga practice, 700 pieces of writing poured out of me.
Oh, wow.
And 400 drawings.
Oh.
And I took those and eventually edited them, and that's the book that's mentioned on the website. Yeah. It's 80 writings and 80 drawings. Unfortunately, and this is where I'm trying to change my life these days, is I never really promoted the book. I never got it out there. So I'm hoping that with the new website, and I'm planning on reprinting the book, and I'm trying to create a more organized routine in my mornings so that I spend at least a half hour each morning, or how do you say, one Pomodoro?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Sure.
Pomodoro. I'm sending out stuff, hey, here's my website. Are you interested in my book? Or, hey, here's my website. Would you like to hire a singing tree? Or, or here's my website. This type of thing, simple marketing things. and try to get that show on the road, because I think the book is maybe some of the most beautiful things I've ever encountered, in my own creative life.
Now, had you written and drawn before that point, or is this something that just kind of came out of you when you started doing yoga?
I mean, I always was good at, English was something that came naturally to me, in school, and but no, I had not done no regular writing. No, was not a writer, and I was not an artist. This stuff was just pouring. I would be in a pose, and this sort of insight would just bloom, open up inside my brain, and it was like fully baked, written, already there. So I just kept a book next to me, and I just, in a sense, I was just recording, what was coming into my consciousness, what was coming into my brain. I realized they were beautiful, and they were coming from someone that I didn't even know existed. Once I realized what was happening, I nurtured it, and I would always stop and record it. And then I think I must have given myself some kind of I had done some painting back in the early 90s. Like, I made these giant doodles that I painted with like black marker and then used watercolors to kind of, I did have a sort of a fling with making some paintings back in the early 90s. I did about 30 of them. So there was definitely some artistic tendency there, but I definitely was not an artist, not in the normal sense that you think of it.
Yeah, like the yoga, somehow that regular practice activated that within you. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And then when it came time to relearn how to play the bass, I never would pick up the bass until I did the yoga practice, because I didn't want to come to it without that beginner's mind, especially in those first years of trying to integrate the new way, or to create these new pathways. Francois says you never unlearn anything. He says that we have everything we've ever learned. It's there. It's all accessible. If I still want to grab the bow like I did in the first year in the orchestra and crash on the string and make ugly noises because the conductor is grimacing at me, I can still do that. That's still there. It's in my body. It never goes away. So the idea of getting rid of bad habits is absurd, he said. What you do is you add new skills. And so I wanted to have that beginner's mind so I could add these new skills.
And so did you really feel like you kind of started the bass from scratch, maybe in a sense, when you got together with Rabbath and you're starting the yoga practice? I mean, I'm assuming that your double bass practice was pretty radically different.
Absolutely. It was... Yeah. I swear all I wanted to do was play 3 notes in a row that sounded effortless and beautiful and were graceful and without any sort of glitch or hindrance. I wrote my first composition because of that obsession with being able to play a down and up and a down using his approach. In his approach, the forearm is the conductor, and the wrists and fingers are relatively passive. Mm-hmm. The thumb is slightly bent, and the arm moves and the wrists and fingers follow. It takes an enormous, when you're dealing with something the size of the bass and the weight of the bows we use, and to trust that to happen after a lifetime of making it happen or muscling it, to let go and allow that sound to come out of the bass unhindered by any sort of tension, and to understand that the wrists and fingers react to the arm, and they are not, for the son premier, you're not trying to control the movement of the wrist or the fingers, just to provide the proper alignment and the proper level of relaxation so that they do what they have to do at the bow changes on their own. That takes a level of letting go. And I honestly don't know if I could have done it without, like I said, without the yoga practice. And yes, it was like starting over. It was insane for me. And for so many years, I was so obsessed with the bow arm and was not anywhere near as organized as Nicholas Walker or Leon Bosch or any of these guys I've been listening to lately. I just did this one thing. That was what I was obsessed with. I just focused on that so much that the left hand really actually kind of wasn't happening, and especially in the upper register and stuff. And I think it was like the third time I went to Paris, Francois said, "You think it might be time to actually start learning how to use your left hand?" So I have a tendency to be I'm trying to change that more and more these days. I attended a lecture by Nicholas at a workshop, and he talked about using a timer and having lists of long-term goals that you want to accomplish on the instrument and devoting just short amounts of time to these things over a long period of time so that by the end of that period of time, you've actually reached all your goals instead of just the two that you were obsessed with during that period. And I'm trying very hard I'm doing better, be more organized that way. I still think there's a place for spontaneity, though, and a place for, like, sometimes obsessing on something can come out of that would never come out of, an organized approach. There's both ways.
This episode is brought to you by Robertson & Sons Violins. For more than 40 years, over 4 decades, Robertson & Sons has specialized in providing the highest quality stringed instruments and bows to collectors, professional musicians, music educators, and students of all ages. Their modern facility, which is totally beautiful, by the way, if you're ever able to make it out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I highly recommend it. They have a recital hall that they use not only for performances, but it's available to their clients. So if you want to try out a fine pedigree bass or even a student bass or anything in between, you can go in that recital hall. I've had the chance to do that. Totally amazing. I'm like a kid in the candy store when I'm down there at Robertson's. Check them out online at robertsonsviolins.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the good folks at Upton Bass String Instrument Company. Eric and Gary and the whole Upton team, I can't say enough good things about them. And they have been on board with the various endeavors I've done online from the start. They were one of the early sponsors of the blog back in 2006 and 2007. And it has been so fun to follow along with their journey and see them develop these new models of basses like the car bass, the Bostonian, the Bohemian, and to connect with all these amazing players. I've had the privilege of speaking with so many people that play Upton basses, from Eric Rivas of Branford Marsalis' band and Lucia Torino of The Devil Makes Three, all the way over to Anthony Monzo of the New Century Chamber Orchestra and Kevin Smith, Willie Nelson's bass player. I've had many students purchase Upton basses over the years. I've had a lot of colleagues play Upton basses. I see them on gigs all the time. They play great, and Upton stands behind their work. Can't recommend them highly enough. Check them out online at uptonbass.com. Both of those have their merits for sure. And it's tough. It's like you don't want to overschedule yourself so much that you can't follow that tangent when it's the right time. And you make some incredible discoveries that way. And you can go too far the other way, and you're just like this whirling dervish of chaos.
Yeah. I don't think I've missed seeing Francois. People might find this interesting. I don't know. After the 5th year of seeing Francois, he told me, "Don't come back."
Huh. I wonder why he...
I don't think I was learning very quickly. And it wasn't that he was judging me. He just felt like he'd given me enough, that I had enough to work with, that either it was going to happen or it wasn't, and that I needed to start to think for myself. And that's basically what he didn't say that in so many words, but he said, "It's time for you to start being your own teacher. I've given you enough." And I was at first very let down. He says, "Oh, I know you love Paris, but don't come back next year." So that's maybe 6 months later, I went to the George Vance workshop again, and there was Francois again. And I played my first program. It was yoga. What I did was I played a number of my original pieces that I had been writing, very simple melodic things that were starting to come out. And I did yoga poses and recited my writings from the book while I was standing on my head.
Oh, wow.
Essentially. So I would do a pose and recite a thing from the book, and then I would stand up and play the bass and then go back and forth. And it was about an hour long. And Francois was sitting in the front row, and afterwards he started bragging to all the people around him. He said, "You see, he played for 1 hour. Oh yeah, he did some yoga, but he played for 1 hour. You see, I cut and he grow." So he took credit for the entire thing.
Oh, that's great.
And that was the beginning of, I think, my sort of starting to have some confidence and starting to make real progress. And the culmination of that, in a sense, not the culmination, but the next time something like that I had a feeling like that, but maybe even more so, was last year or the year before. It was within the last couple of years. I was working at the hospital, and I was playing one of Francois' pieces for a patient in the bone marrow unit. normally, the piece would be played with quite a big dynamic range. It's a piece called Reitba, which I'm sure you know. But in this case, it was a dark room. Patient just wanted to be very relaxed and quiet. And I knew they couldn't handle a lot of sound. I intuited that. So I think I had played some other music already, and I described what the piece was like, and I said, are you game for this? And they said yes. So I played Reitba at a whisper, the whole piece, so much so that maybe even some of the notes didn't even speak as fundamentals. And afterwards, it was quiet, and then he spoke up and he said, you have no idea. That took me places you can't even imagine. What an incredible journey that was. And he described some of the visions that he'd had. And it was just a fantastic moment, for me. And I left feeling fantastic. I left the room feeling fantastic. And I walked out into the staff area, and I called Francois. Oh. Something I probably had maybe I'd done twice in all these years or something. Yeah. I don't chat with him, on a regular basis. And I called him, and he picked up. And I described to him what happened. And I said, so how are you doing? And he said, fantastic, wonderful what you're doing. And I said, so how are you doing? And he said, I just went to South America and Brazil, and I'm opening up a whole new region to the new technique and blah, blah, blah. And it was wonderful. And then he said, by the way, have I given you your diplomas? My heart almost stopped, literally. I never thought in a million years that I would get one of those. It wasn't even on my radar. I knew some people had them, like people like Nicholas, people with Fulbright scholarships, and I just didn't. It didn't even register that I would ever get one of those. It wasn't going to happen. And I didn't think about it. So when he said that, I almost started to cry right away. And he said, "What you're doing is fantastic, and I want to give you your diplomas, and I want to give you both the teaching diploma. You're doing a great job with your teaching." And I would send some students to Kansas City, and Francois would notice that they were getting the bow thing happening. Anyway, he gave me both diplomas. He said, the only thing is you have to come to Paris and bring your wife. So that Christmas, we went to Paris, and I got my 2 diplomas. Unbelievable.
You could pick a worse place to spend Christmas in than Paris. That's for sure. Your wife probably wasn't complaining. No. That was, but incredible. And I saw him again that summer, and I played a solo concert, better part of an hour of all the stuff I play at the hospital at Moffitt. And he came up to me, and he took my face in his hands, and he said, "You progress." And I said and later I got a chance to talk to him, and I said, I understand what those diplomas are about. I said, that doesn't mean I've graduated from anything. It just means that you're encouraging me to go further, to go forward. And he said, you got it now. So he just wants people to grow, to grow. It's a beautiful thing. And people listening who aren't familiar with Rabbath's teachings, I mean, this gives them a great insight into just what it's really like studying with him.
He says if you're going to teach anything, if you're only going to teach one thing, teach the bow. Mm-hmm. I think that saved me. That saved my life. What he was able to share. The left-hand stuff, it's fantastic. It's a great approach. And that integrated with some of the newer, exciting things that are happening as well, that are actually no different than what he does, just a slightly different take on certain things. But that's all fantastic. But to me, without the bow, it just doesn't have the same meaning.
So 10 years into being in the Florida Orchestra, you're picking up yoga, and you've discovered Francois and his teachings, and you're changing your playing. When did you start to work in a hospital environment? When did that come about?
Well, I noticed that as things started to finally get a little bit easier, that I was making a nice sound, a really beautiful sound. And I never was that, again, I keep bringing up Leon Bosch. I never felt like I was someone that was going to ever be able to do everything. I always wanted to do just a few things well. And I started to write these little melodies, these simple melodies, and these tunes. And they really were simple, just pretty melodies. A lot like, in a way, with the same approach to the yoga thing, just I'd be warming up and a few notes would come out and I'd say, okay, well, maybe that's a piece, maybe that's a little song. And I had a few of those, and I was still doing my yoga practice very regularly, and I kept, during my meditations at the end of each yoga practice, I kept having this sort of, one of the things that I did is at the very end of the practice, I'd do this meditation, and then I'd sit quietly and see if there were any messages, anything I needed to hear from my inner self. And I kept getting the same message that I should go do some volunteer work, just to play these simple melodies for some people, maybe at a hospital or something. And this probably went on for a year and a half. And then one day I just decided to act on it. So the Moffitt Cancer Center it's a National Cancer Institute. It's a very highly respected place, like up on the same level as Sloan Kettering and places like that. It's just down the street from me, down the road from me. And I went and I walked in the door and I met a woman named Cheryl Bellinger. And she was I found out, certified music practitioner. I had never heard of that before. And she was working for a program called the Arts and Medicine Program at the Moffitt Cancer Center. And she informed me that I was welcome to play in some of the lobbies and waiting rooms and see if it was a good fit for me. But I couldn't play at the bedside unless I was certified, trained and certified. So I was happy to just, see what it felt like to play for people in lobbies and waiting rooms. And I fell in love with it. And over the next 2.5 years, at some point I decided to do the training. It took the better part of a year. It's through a program called the Music for Healing and Transition Program out of upstate New York. The program was founded in 1995, and it was designed to try to train people to effectively offer music at the bedside in the healthcare settings and do it in a professional way. Do it in a well-informed and professional way with some basic strategies on how to choose repertoire, how to engage people, how to avoid doing any harm, and how to work with hospital staff and hospital protocol and infection control and all that stuff. And I found the program invaluable, and I did my internship. And at that point, I didn't know what was going to happen. And then Cheryl took over the coordinator position when the coordinator left. And that left an opening. I took a year off from the orchestra, a year's leave of absence, which they graciously gave me. And I tried what it would feel like to do that, 15 hours a week or 20 hours a week. And I never went back. I got hired to the Moffitt Arts and Medicine Program as a artist in residence. And it's been 8 years, I believe. And the best thing in the world I ever could have done. Not to say the orchestra wasn't wonderful, and just being around that great music all those years is, filled my mind and heart with material, that just a love of music appreciation for music that I would never have had. But being able to let that love of music flow out in a way that's highly intimate and highly meaningful, such as that story I told you a little while earlier about playing Reitba, it's been unbelievable, incredible. All the repertoire I've created and all the writing I do, the arranging I do, and everything, it's geared towards that job, towards that work. And that's partly why I'm not embarrassed to write simple things, simple tunes, why I'm not trying to impress anyone with an enormous amount of technique, or because the music you play in a situation like that has to be it's there to serve the patient, not to serve you. Mm-hmm. I'm not performing, I'm giving a gift of music, let's say. And what I give needs to be, if it's difficult for me, if it's on the edge of my ability to play, it's inappropriate to play there.
Sure.
And if the music is too long-winded, or it just has to serve the situation. And that has informed everything I've done for the last 8 years. I just released that solo CD, The Way Back. It has 24 tracks of some of my best compositions and arrangements. It's available on the website and all that. And then Lucas asked me last year if I wanted to publish some of the arrangements and pieces. So Lucas Drew. So we published. Janet Clippard did all the typesetting, and she was amazing. Another bassist that I've known since college. So now a dozen of those pieces are available through St. Francis Music. They're available on the website as well. So in a way, everything, I feel like a much more well-rounded musician. I don't think I ever would have arranged as much as I have. I don't think I ever would have written as much as I have. It's all come out of this work at the hospital.
In a way, it's kind of a creative restraint, but it leads to such interesting material. Like you're trying to, like you said, present things that aren't overly technically like bonkers, and you're doing arrangements of familiar tunes, and then you're writing your own pieces, and I can see how that's just incredibly creatively satisfying, let alone the emotional experience of this setting.
Absolutely. Emotionally, the emotional experience is if it's working, which it seems to be most of the time, there's nothing else like that. I think that every musician should experience what it feels. If I had my way, I would program this into every musician's college career. Spend a semester doing the kind of training that I did, and then spend another semester interning at some hospital or some hospice or whatever, and put this into practice. Because when I experienced what it felt like to use music as a service, as a gift, a truly humble gift that needs and absolutely has to connect with the listener, that changes everything. I really think at its heart, music is something that's designed to move people, to touch them, to transport them, even transform them, their attitude, their feelings about themselves, their memories. It accesses every part of us, or can, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual even. And to have that as your first intention changes everything about performance. Now when I go and play in front of, I'll never forget, I went to the workshop that summer to give my first 1 hour thing, of just me playing my stuff at the Kansas City workshop, and Francois sitting off to the left, and Nicholas Walker plops himself down right in front of me. I mean, he had to be like less than 6 feet from my knees in this. We were on a stage, a bunch of chairs. And I really have huge respect for this guy. And there was a chance I would be so nervous having him sit there that I would just crash and burn. But I just closed my eyes and thought about Mark and thought about what I do every day and what it's supposed to be about. And I was able to play that performance with Nicholas sitting there 6 feet from me. So that's huge. Yeah. That's huge, Can you imagine how beneficial that would be for musicians to, even if then they can go out and play their most avant-garde, innovative, cutting-edge, whatever. But at least if they have that intention going on, that intention to give this thing as a gift freely, I just think it would change everything. I don't know about the way people play.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Check out their Kaplan strings, which have versatility and control throughout the entire dynamic spectrum. Rich tonal color palette, superb bow response, and beautiful balance. I've been using them myself on my bass for the last year or so and totally love them. They sound great pizzicato. They sound great arco. Folks like David Allen Moore of the Los Angeles Philharmonic use them. Brandino of Black Eyed Peas, he uses them. What fantastic strings. Thank you for sponsoring the podcast, D'Addario. This episode is brought to you by the English Double Bass Book, a new book by George and Tom Martin along with Martin Lawrence, which examines the great English double bass makers of the 18th and 19th century, illustrating in fine detail the incredible work they produced. It also explores the fascinating story of how the double bass came to England, its development guided by the great virtuoso Domenico Dragonetti, and the rise and fall of the English double bass makers. To pre-order your limited edition copy, visit www.theenglishdoublebass.com. I think it absolutely would. I mean, because it gets, like you said, it gets back down to the real core of why music exists, the beautiful gift that music is. And, I'll bet a lot of people listening haven't even thought of that as a career that anybody even could do. I know a little bit about it because my wife is in medicine, and what a emotionally pure experience, but boy, it must be both incredibly gratifying and it's got to be at least sort of emotionally exhausting. How do you manage that? How do you find balance with just that and just living your life?
People assume that it's going to be draining. And I've heard other practitioners talk about this, like social workers and even other music practitioners, but I don't get it, because the music literally transforms these people in that moment. Yeah. You may walk into a room and someone may be distracted and they say, yeah, okay, whatever, do your thing. And the TV's on maybe, and there's a lot of activity going on and whatnot. And you start to play and you see them reach for the remote and shut off the television, and they begin to focus on the visual aspect of the instrument. And then you look up a little bit while later and you see that there's a little smile on their face and that they're ignoring everything else but the music. Their breathing is different. Everything is different. The whole thing has been transformed. And then maybe you play longer or whatever, or maybe it's 1 piece, 2 piece, 3 piece, whatever. You might have a little interaction in between. And then at the end they say, wow, man, you just made my day. What I was feeling really this way, tense or whatever, and I was grouchy, and man, that just really brightened my day. Thank you so much. That transformation, you see it happen over and over again, and you really can't take credit for it. I mean, you can in a sense that hopefully you chose a piece that connected with that. There's certain things that you did right, but in the end, it's the music that does that. It's the vibration of the instrument, just the pure sound of the instrument and the vibration, and the fact that you did it well is awesome, but ultimately it's the music that creates this bridge for the person to transform themselves. So when you see that, when that's the majority of what you see, how draining can that be? Yeah. I'm not the nurse going in there to stick them 27 times a day. I'm not the doctor going to look at their furrowed brow and consult them on good or bad news or whatever. I'm not anybody trying to do anything to them. I'm just trying to give them a break. I end up seeing the best of these people, the absolute best of these people. There's a guy who came up to me once in the hospital. I have a little blog on the website which has some first-person anecdotes about visits. They're very short, very simple. They're written in the first person, like, here I am at this patient's room, I'm playing this, oh, now they're doing this. Now it's very, straightforward. And one time a guy came up to me and said, when I heard you playing an hour ago, it was the first time I thought, maybe I can get through this. Something like that. Yeah. It blows your mind, It's crazy. It's just insane. And who would have thought? Double bass? I stand in front of the doorway most of the time because I can't really fit in these rooms.
That was going to be my other question, because I'm just picturing your average hospital room. Like, what are the space logistics? Okay, so you're in the doorway.
I position myself in the doorway with enough space around me that if a nurse or anybody has to get in, we do a little dance, Yeah. I play on a standing, and I can't move the bass, while I'm playing, but I can certainly swing it in one direction or another, or lean back or lean forward. And I just do this dance with the nurses and the techs, and they're all used to it. I would swear they anticipate my bow direction.
Wow.
So that they get in and out, easily. It's a dance.
Now, if someone out there listening, I'm sure there are going to be several people listening that are interested in learning more about this, maybe trying to get into it themselves, what would their first step be?
The program that I went through is called the Music for Healing and Transition Program. Mm-hmm. It's mhtp.org. And all the requirements are there. There are 6 or, I don't remember exactly, 6 or 8 modules. Each one takes an entire weekend. And really, you just have to attend the modules, read a number of different texts, books, do some book reports. You work with a mentor who kind of reads your book reports. And later on in the training, you start doing an internship where you actually start doing the work in a hospital or wherever. You document each visit with a form that they have, and then you send those to your mentor. And toward the end of the program, you have a supervised practicum where someone observes you actually doing the work. It's kind of I guess it's sort of kind of like a final exam maybe in a way. But really, it's not brain surgery. The training is vital. I don't think I would have done nearly as good a job or ever been as good at it as I am without some of the strategies I learned through the training, and I highly recommend it. Mm-hmm. It is given in various cities throughout the country where there's enough interest. So a class might not be happening in Tampa this month, but it might be happening 3 months from now. Okay. And you can also travel if you have the means. You can also fly somewhere where they are having classes for the weekend, and do it that way. But not everybody has that sort of cash on hand. But it's very doable, not difficult, really, by any stretch. Just very, very informative and very helpful. One of the key things that I learned in the training, which sticks with me, is the idea of entrainment. and the idea of meeting patients where they are. So entrainment has two aspects to it, physical and psychological, the way they teach it. The physical aspect is really very basic. We all know how our bodies will respond to music. We might move our bodies in rhythm to the music or sway, or any number of things could happen. We might find our breathing changing, even our heart rate changing. And realizing how powerful that was a big deal. If you have a heart patient who's freshly out of surgery, whose heart rhythm is still unstable, what would you do? What's the strategy? So I would choose music between 60 and 80 beats per minute. And try to simply reinforce regular heartbeat and not change the tempo abruptly or use lots of accelerando or whatever. I would just try to keep things very steady, tempo and rhythm, very steady. So that would be supportive of that. So that was a revelation, basic, but a revelation nonetheless. And then the idea of psychological entrainment or emotional entrainment. One of my very first experiences putting the training into practice was at a hospice house where people were terminally ill, and there was a prospect of people maybe not living too much longer. Mm-hmm. I was included in one of the staff meetings, which was a surprise. I was really happy about that, and I heard about each patient and what their status was. And I went out to have my first visit with this guy who was severely depressed. He was depressed to the point where he wasn't making eye contact with anyone, including his wife. His head was facing the back wall of his room, and his wife was sitting in a chair along the opposite wall and clearly not happy, signs of tears and so on. And I took literally the training, and the training said that I need to meet this patient, validate this patient with the music that I play, not play some happy jig or something, but play something that would reflect his place and energy. So I started with this piece that I haven't played this piece at the hospital hardly ever, but it was one of Rabbath's pieces called Incantation pour Huneau, which it's a very kind of mournful D minor kind of a sounding thing. And I started with that, and in the next piece I think I may have added a little more of a steady rhythm, perhaps, slightly more tempo. And then I think the next piece was sort of vacillated between major and minor a little bit, and maybe was in a 3/4 time, and so on, moved gradually toward almost happy music or upbeat music. And I noticed between each piece, he began to turn his head incrementally. It was almost like just a ratcheting movement. It was like, oh, there's a click. His head's turning a little bit. Oh, there's another click. And during I think it was the fourth piece, he was making eye contact with me directly and mouthed the words, "Thank you."
Oh, wow.
And at that moment, his wife, just a flood of gates open, and she just was bawling. And obviously with a certain amount of happiness, mixed in, just the relief, that something was happening. And afterwards, I said to myself, this works, Afterwards, a chaplain came up to me and laid his hand on my arm, in that comforting gesture that they do. And he said, "Are you okay?" He said, "I heard you playing this really sad music. Did that affect you emotionally?" I started laughing. Right. I said, "No, man, I'm just trying to do my job."
Yeah.
And I explained to him the principle, and he got it. But that was my first experience with that, and it was incredibly invaluable. It was just having those strategies.
And so that's called entrainment. The physical.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Physical and psychological entrainment, they call it. The psychological part, I kind of add the word emotional to that. And also another thing I try to keep an eye on is the patient's energy level. All those things figure into that very first piece that I play needs to fit all those parameters. Mm-hmm. It needs to validate where they are energetically, emotionally, even physically to a certain degree.
That makes total sense. I never even thought that, but as soon as you started describing it, of course, that makes sense that you take them on that journey and move them in the direction of betterment.
A lot of what happens to us in our lives and our careers depends a lot on other people's kindness. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to say thank you to Lucas Drew for keeping me for finding a way to manufacture an assistantship for me when I was ready to graduate, and I would have been eaten alive, and kept me there an extra year and a half until that orchestra job opened. There are moments in our lives where things just happen that are against all the odds. And I've had more than my share of those somehow, I feel like. And I just want to get the idea out there to young people that there's nothing wrong with being passionate and maybe even a little bit naive and believing in yourself. Because really the odds were entirely not in my favor of ever being successful as a bassist or a musician. But if that three-legged stool is there, if the desire is there, the passion, and the willingness to work at it, sometimes the universe will come around and just give you what you need. And it may not even be where you thought you were headed. But I just was, while I was meditating earlier, that was a big deal to me to just get that out.
Mm-hmm. It's a valuable lesson. It's fun. I was just thinking about that myself. I discovered this 5-year plan that I'd put together about 15 years ago. And it was, my 5-year plan was in 5 years, be principal of the Chicago Symphony, right? And then then the other thing was like all these other things. And I looked at the whole list, and I hadn't accomplished a single dang thing on the list, right? And then I started thinking about all the fortunes that I've had in my life and how I wouldn't take anything back or change anything, or the directions and the happenstances that were, and that's just what life is. It's this journey, and approaching with gratitude, so valuable.
Yeah, and Moffitt, the program at Moffitt, I do want to say that there's not a ton of work out there. Mm-hmm. Established programs in the country, like what we have at Moffitt. We have 6 people on staff at Moffitt and another couple of people at a couple of other satellite places. We have a coordinator, and everyone is a permanent part-time employee. We get benefits. They take this seriously, and they are extremely ahead of the curve. That's not the case everywhere. So many institutions are dipping their feet into the idea of doing some kind of arts and medicine program, but they don't want to pay for it, or they want it to be grant-driven, or I'm extremely fortunate to be in a program where this is a fantastic model, and I just want to get this idea out there that if anybody's interested in starting a program like this, or they want to be the first person to kind of provide the impetus to create a program like this someplace, that Moffitt is an awesome model for the program. And myself or the coordinator of the program would be happy to provide, some guidance in that way. I also wanted to mention Singing Tree, which you asked me about.
Right, yeah.
I met Ray almost at the beginning of my tenure at Moffitt. He happened to be my coordinator's husband, playing the hammered dulcimer. And that has been one of the most joyful musical journeys. We've had 9 years together, 2 albums, and many, many performances. And hammered dulcimer and bass, it's like heaven.
Oh, it's a great combination. I wouldn't think of those two, or I hadn't thought of those 2 timbres really until I heard that, but it works so well.
Yeah, and I think we spent 4 years on the last record on the arranging, and really took our time. And actually Ray was quite angry with me at how long the project took and how much it cost. But he's 77 this year, so I can sort of understand why he's a little impatient.
Right.
But that's been an amazing thing. And that, again, came out of working there. Just recently, like I mentioned to you before we started recording, I was playing my arrangement of Let It Be in the lobby, this giant atrium, one of the lobbies in the clinic building, the outpatient building. And this guy walks up to me and tells me that he works with a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame guy named Marty Ballin. And would I be interested in working on an acoustic project with them? And I didn't know who Marty was. I vaguely knew who the Jefferson Airplane was. And I didn't call this guy back for weeks. And then when I told my wife about it, she almost hit me over the head and said, get on the phone and call that guy now. Now, I mean it. So for the last couple of years, I've had the privilege of recording and touring and making some really decent money. It's not the most life-changing music that I've probably ever made, but it's just another example of you put one foot in front of the other, and sometimes things happen. You don't know how it happens, Mm-hmm. And so I just, again, for young people, put one foot in front of the other, walk in a direction, believe in what you're doing. And sometimes, many times, it all works out. So that was a nice shot in the arm. I learned the ins and outs of traveling with a folding bass, and I researched amplifiers and guitar pedals and finding a way to make a nice bowed sound out of a not very good instrument in a loud setting, and stuffing my F-holes with foam and every other thing in a million years I never would have seen myself doing. But it just, it was a learning curve, and it was fun. It was really fun. So that's been really cool.
And what a great way of the chance encounter, like those moments in life, that like how that opportunity came your way. That's great.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have had I not been standing there in that lobby doing the unlikely thing, playing solo bass in the middle of a lobby.
That's going to do it for another episode of Contrabass Conversations. I'm so glad to have you here. And if you'd like to get in touch, email me at feedback@contrabassconversations.com. I respond to each and every email I get, and I love to hear guest ideas, topic ideas. That would be fantastic. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't yet. You can go to our website, contrabassconversations.com/subscribe, or just go to our website. You'll find the link right there. And if you would like to help out the show, the number one thing you could do to help out this show, Contrabass Conversations, is tell a friend. Tell a student, tell a colleague. They can be a bass player, a non-bass player. That would be so helpful for helping this show grow. If you haven't checked out our archive of over 400 episodes, you can get our Contrabass Conversations app. That is contrabassconversations.com/app, or just search for us in the app store of your choice. That's going to do it for today's episode. I'm Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.